As the election draws near, liberal Fox News commentator Jessica Tarlov is becoming justifiably and increasingly fed up with the bad faith of her MAGA co-hosts and repeatedly had to shut them down with a series of important fact checks. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video. So over the weekend, I was actually in Las Vegas, Nevada, canvassing and door knocking, trying to get out the vote for Vice President Kamala Harris. Took some time away from content creation. And on the way back, I'm like, you know what? I need some comfort food. And I saw that Jessica Tarlov, of course, was giving out fact checks left, right, and center on the 5. And that is my comfort food in terms of content creation. And given that the election is very close, according to the data, it's very possible that Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States, which is terrifying, but is possible. I felt that it was important for us to have some comfort food. So here is an increasingly fed up Jessica Tarlov laying the proverbial smackdown on her MAGA co-hosts.
Or are they just throwing it up against the wall since everything else is not working for them?
No, there is data that people don't have faith in the Supreme Court, which right now is an arm of the Republican
on the
Party.
Fascism part.
100%. That's what's resonating with right-leaning independents and with Republican voters that are open to voting for her, that Haley block, the Liz Cheney block. But they aren't using this because they're not getting it from a direct source that worked with him. So they're getting this from Mark Milley and from John Kelly, who gave on-the-record interviews. You can hear it in John Kelly's own voice talking about it. And the central premise of this and of so many things when it comes to Donald Trump is that we should just not take his words seriously. That Kamala's words matter and what Donald Trump says doesn't. Because guess what? Donald Trump calls Kamala a fascist quite regularly. He did it last month a couple times. He did it in August. Jake Tapper, just in the last hour, was playing audio of it. And so not only does he call her a fascist, he also calls her a communist. And last time I checked, communists were pretty bad. Mao, Stalin, they're responsible for over 100 million people's deaths. George Bush commemorated the lives lost to communism in 2007, I believe that it was. So spare me, as usual.
She's right. So a couple of things. Number one, she begins on talking about the Supreme Court. I should say a recent Marquette Law School poll suggested that 90% of respondents, 90%, think about that, 90% support aggressive Supreme Court reforms, including an enforceable code of conduct and term limits. But she's right. Jessica Tarlov is right when it comes to the double standard. Donald Trump can say whatever he wants, whenever he wants, about whomever he wants with impunity. And his Trump supporting, Fox News hosts, they don't care, right? Katie Pavlik, Jesse Waters, Jeanine Pirro, Greg Gutfeld, they didn't bother to interrupt Jessica Tarlov there, even though they're wont to do so, by saying, no, of course, Donald Trump's words matter. And of course, we take what he says very seriously. And of course, when he says something bad, we hold him accountable. No, they just stayed silent because they're like, yeah, of course not. We don't, we scrutinize every single thing that Kamala Harris says and we hold her to the highest possible standard. But Donald Trump, no, of course not. You should just ignore all the bad stuff that he says, but also when he says some good stuff that we like, well, then we should absolutely have faith in it. The double standard is gross. It's despicable. And when it comes to name calling, there's no difference, right? So per usual, MAGA Fox News hosts and others are clutching their pearls that Vice President Harris has correctly referred to Donald Trump as a fascist and really dragging her feet to do so. Multiple former Trump officials, multiple former top generals under Trump, the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, former White House Chief of Staff, General John Kelly. They've all referred to Donald Trump as an authoritarian, as a fascist. And that's coming from Trump's own people. And so you can disagree with it all you want, but they know Trump far better than Jesse Waters, Jeanine Pirro, Greg Gutfeld, and Katie Pavlik. So I'm not sure they have the informed opinion to contradict these generals, but so be it. If your issue is you shouldn't call Trump a fascist, well, Jessica Tarlov is right. Donald Trump says all sorts of unhinged things about Kamala Harris. And here's a reminder.
Let me just play you a little bit about what Donald Trump has had to say about Kamala Harris.
The true divide in American politics today is between these far-left fascists led by Harris and her group. We have a fascist person running who's incompetent.
She's a Marxist, communist, fascist, socialist. She's not actually a socialist. She's gone past that. Somebody's got to explain this woman. There's a radical left Marxist, communist, fascist.
So here's the thing. I don't get offended when Donald Trump refers to Democrats as that. I mean, I've got thick skin. I imagine many of you do too. What offends me is the double standard. It's pick a standard. if name calling is okay, then when, Democrats call Republicans names, shut up. If you don't like it, then that means you should enforce a no name calling policy on your side as well. Pick a standard. Either there's name calling or there's no name calling, one or the other, right? And if you want to quibble about, well, I just don't think that particular name applies to this person, fair enough. I don't think Kamala Harris is a communist. I think referring to the vice president as a communist is ridiculous, but I'm not going to get offended if you do it. And this is what just MAGA, they don't understand. They really, really, really cannot fathom a world that is not predicated on their double standard. They genuinely want a world where they can say whatever they want, whenever they want, about whomever they want, but you can't say whatever you want, whenever you want about them. You can't. You have to treat them with kid gloves. They get to treat you with absolute cruelty. And that sort of hypocrisy is something that personally I find incredibly pathetic, and I love making fun of people who indulge in it. And I encourage you to do the same. Some more from Jessica Tarlov.
I don't want to use his name in those contexts, but to say that this is something that they are inventing versus that they're getting it from the people who worked for him is absolutely not fair. And I would just say, if you are upset that you're being called an authoritarian, go and take a look at his Truth Social post from right before the show started. This cease and desist letter that he has about prosecuting people he suspects of cheating. And this extends to lawyers, political operatives, donors, illegal voters.
Oh, lawfare.
So why didn't they indict Hillary Clinton when he had the goods on her?
Because there was nothing on her.
Are you kidding?
I am not kidding.
Oh, she didn't have any classified documents?
Are you kidding?
She only used her laptop and her phone. Where did she keep the classified documents and the emails?
Who was a Republican,
okay, and
by the way.
already he's talking about Hunter Biden. Donald Trump is trying to make sure. Donald Trump is trying to make sure that he heals the country. So don't make it sound like
the country.
Yeah.
So it's much of the.
So Donald Trump is the most divisive figure in modern politics. It's funny that Jeanine Pirro has the temerity to actually say this. Donald Trump contributed more individually to America's divide than any political figure. It's just objectively true, and it's reflected in the polls, which is why most people don't like him, including many of his own supporters. There are many people, there's a huge chunk of Trump's base that say that they're going to vote for him because despite the fact that they don't like him, that they think he's corrupt, that they think he's dishonest, that they think he's vengeful, right? It's in spite of him. So when she says that Donald Trump is trying to heal the country, it's patently absurd. And I'll remind you, again, I love this article. The New York Times did this expose back in late September, reminding people that when Donald Trump says he didn't go after Hillary Clinton or his critics or his political opponents, that's a lie. It's revisionist history. Jeanine Pirro, Greg Gutfeld, Jesse Waters, Katie Pat, they're all engaging in revisionist history, hoping that you will have forgotten, given the short attention span of the American people. But when Donald Trump was the candidate in 2016, he was the one leading chants of lock her up, lock her up. That was unprecedented. We've never seen anything like that in American history prior to, certainly not modern American history, and certainly not from Democrats. As a matter of fact, when people in the Democratic coalition today say, lock him up, Kamala Harris is the one saying, no, that's up to the courts. That's up to the legal system. We're not going to chant and not going to call for the imprisonment of our political opponents. Now, I would argue, given that Donald Trump is a convicted felon, and given that there is credible evidence that he's committed crimes against the American people, it would not be irrational for people cheering for him to be imprisoned. But Kamala Harris is so observant of decorum and respect and civility politics, much more than Donald Trump ever was, that she nips it in the bud. She's morally superior to Donald Trump. It's just objectively the case. It's also objectively the case that when Trump was president, he did repeatedly try to use the Justice Department against his opponents. James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, former Secretary of State, and others as well, repeatedly had them investigated. They were investigated by law enforcement organs after Trump repeatedly, in private or public, sometimes both, expressed a wish to see them investigated. Now, the fact that he wasn't ever able to get them prosecuted successfully, I shouldn't say all of them, some of them were prosecuted and some even successfully, but the fact that Hillary Clinton was never successfully prosecuted isn't because Donald Trump didn't try. It was because the Justice Department didn't believe that they could make a credible case against her. Again, I go back to Donald Trump does not and should not get credit for trying to do something really bad and failing. That's because he's really bad and stupid. And his enemies that he tries to go after are very often better people than he is. And so even though he is somebody who has, committed crimes and there's credible evidence that he's committed crimes, very often the people that he opposes do not. You can say whatever you want about Hillary Clinton. You can dislike Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's a better person than Donald Trump, much less criminal than Donald Trump. He tried to use the levers of power against Hillary Clinton. And that was despite the fact that there were people in the Trump Justice Department the first time who were willing to say, no, we're not going to go after, quote unquote, trumped up charges, right? Pun intended. The whole point of a second Trump administration, why it's even more dangerous and more alarming, is because Trump says he will not have those people to defy him or to try to manage him or to try to discourage him or to try to redirect him. He will have yes men and sycophants who will do as they are told without any sort of fidelity to the Constitution. Their loyalty has to be to him personally. That's the currency by which he will evaluate, members of the Trump administration. That's a meaningful difference. So again, I want you to keep this in mind, that if you ever have this conversation with your uncle at Thanksgiving or, your Trump supporting friend, keep that in mind. When they say, well, he just talked about going after his opponents, he never tried. That's not true. He did try. The fact that he failed isn't something for which you give them credit. And again, use the attempted murder metaphor. Be like Uncle so-and-so or best friend so-and-so. If somebody tried to kill me and they failed, they slipped on a banana peel, whatever, I ran away. If they tried to kill me but failed, would you say, no harm, no foul? No, of course not. You would say you tried. If you had it your way, you would have succeeded. You failed either because of incompetence or for whatever reason. But attempted murder is still a serious charge for which there are serious penalties. So why on earth would we give credit to Trump or not give blame to Trump for trying to do something bad and simply failing? The logic doesn't make any sense. You can also say, put the shoe on the other foot. Be like, okay, imagine a Democratic president goes after, for pure political reasons, a Republican he doesn't like and fails. Does that mean you're going to give that Democrat credit for trying but failing to go after a Republican? No, of course not. So have the same damn standard. Don't be a hypocrite. Don't be an unprincipled loser. Pick one standard for both sides and stick with it. But that's the problem with so many MAGA Republicans. They cannot abide a world where their side is held to the same standard they want to impose on the other side, because if they do, their side will almost always lose. It's, again, I quote, it's the same thing. I go back to there's some things in life that are relatively unambiguous, and I'm sorry, but the dishonesty and corruption within the Republican Party, not that every Republican is corrupt or dishonest, but there's a disproportionate presence of corruption and dishonesty in the GOP than the Democratic Party. And that, friends, is why this double standard exists. It's a form of self-defense. It's a form of self-preservation by MAGA Republicans, because they know they can't live up to the standard that they try to force on you and me. And Donald Trump will always lose by that metric. So they employ double standards. Great performance by Jessica Tarlov. I had other clips to play, but I got off in this tirade because these are the most important ones. I'm sure we'll cover some more of her content later on. But yeah, it's great that she's shutting down these MAGA Republicans in their tracks. She has the hardest job in legacy media, and I imagine as the election draws nearer, her job's going to get harder still. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.